So today's topic is creating cultures of purpose, how, what, and when. And this topic is all about responsible leadership. And responsible leadership in turn is about striving to become a better person, behaving responsibly towards your colleagues, and making your companies and organizations thrive by developing sustainable business opportunities to solve the challenges of today's world. We're joined today by Dr. George Woods for his presentation, followed by the reflection of Pierre-Yves Robert. Dr. George Woods, our speaker, is the CEO of the Culture Architects. Dr. Woods is a systems thinking, C-suite executive and organizational transformation strategist with over 30 years of cross-sector leadership spanning financial services, healthcare, social enterprise, and humanitarian organizations. He's led major strategic, cultural, and organizational change initiatives for global institutions, including HSBC, Deutsche Bank, EY, and Nedbank, as well as St. John Ambulance. George's work focus is on building high-performing cultures, enabling organizational resilience, and driving sustainable growth. Dr. Woods also lectures in leadership and strategy and serves as an academic tutor at Business School Netherlands. He actively contributes to social impact through board service and leadership mentoring across the UK and Africa. Our reflector today is Pierre-Yves Robert, who is the co-founder and managing partner of the Culture Architects. Pierre is an accomplished C-suite leader, non-executive director, and business coach with extensive experience across South Africa and the UK. He specializes in organizational culture, strategic alignment, transformation, and sustainable growth for startups, scale-ups, and established enterprises. Pierre-Yves has served on multiple boards, including as chair, strengthening governance and decision-making frameworks, and he's also a tutor with Business School Netherlands, supporting leadership and strategic management development. And passionate about people and culture, he helps organizations build collaborative teams and drive meaningful, lasting change. Dr. George, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, and a huge privilege to be with you all again this morning. And Pierre, thank you for being my colleague, and as we develop this discussion together. Organizational culture, why it matters. Thanks, Pierre, if you want to start sharing. One of the topics that we're particularly passionate about is unlocking potential. And culture is an enabler for potential. Pierre, I think it's safe to say, and we'll reflect on this as we go, but we often talk around unlocking discretionary energy. And so if we think, and thank you, next slide. So if we think of the most basic human need of psychological safety, and then that Maslow's description of that hierarchy of needs, as we move from basic safety into self-actualizing human beings, we do this when we feel safe, when we feel valued, when we feel that we're purposeful. And this directly translates into company culture. So company culture is the backbone of any successful organization. Next slide. What we developed is a model which we want to explore with you briefly today. Right in the center of that model is mission and purpose. When you, I, as human beings, feel purposeful, when we understand why it is what we're doing, when we're able to link that to real tangible outcomes, we feel purposeful. Okay, and so purpose and mission right at the center of our model. And this model then radiates out into elements like leadership and development and governance structures and methods and sustainability for the greater good and shared economy for shared meaning. And we don't have time necessarily to go into this today. But the area that we want to talk about that radiates out from purpose is the culture of an organization. And so that's why we've shared this model. I'm very happy to share it with you afterwards. Thanks, Pierre. So the importance of healthy organizational culture. Organizational culture is a tangible driver of performance and innovation and long-term sustainability of business. One of the areas of particular passion for us has been organizations pre-pandemic. Remember that little event called the pandemic? It's just a small event, slightly destabilizing. organizations pre-pandemic and organizations post-pandemic. And I think it's safe to argue that organizations that had more resilient and robust cultures and invested in their people were organizations that managed to thrive in the midst of what was a very, very difficult time across the globe. And of course, what we want to do today as well is identify the drivers of cultural transformation. So key individuals and groups who lead and influence culture change within an organization. Thanks, Pierre. So why culture matters? And the interesting thing about culture is it remains, I would argue, one of the most underinvested elements of corporate strategy. Now, we will be corrected on this. Drucker did not necessarily quote this, but it's been attributed to him, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can have the greatest culture or greatest strategy in the world and greatest plans and greatest ambitions, but if you haven't got healthy culture, organizational culture underpinning your strategy, this influences you immensely. We know that culture drives innovation, and I referred in the opening remarks to psychological safety. Psychological safety within culture leads, we know, to significantly higher innovation rates. And this has been proven time and time again by major research projects. And again, a particular area of passion for us has been that sort of pre-pandemic world and then the post-pandemic world. Culture influences business success. Most employees view culture as critical to business success, impacting engagement and performance. And my question to you this morning is, how important do you view it? How important do you view it within your own organization? We have seen time and time again through research that good culture enables growth. Strong organizational culture correlates with significantly higher revenue growth and business performance. The opposite is true, that poor organizational culture, unhealthy organizational culture, or culture where employees don't feel safe, don't necessarily thrive, or they don't thrive for long. So if you want to unlock discretionary energy, in other words, where employees are so engaged, they give more than what is expected of them, we would argue that culture is a key enabler. Culture is definitely a strategic advantage. It's the invisible architecture that shapes success, often more impactfully than strategy alone. Thanks, Pierre. So we share this against a backdrop of contemporary challenges. What are those contemporary challenges? There's technological evolution, and we know that AI and automation accelerating change, requiring organizations to adapt and foster continuous learning across teams. Culture is a great enabler here. The healthier the culture, the more engaged your employees will be. The more engaged they will be to embrace some of these challenges. We know that we're operating in a world of hybrid workforce dynamics. So hybrid and mobile workforces, and building new trust and psychological safety strategies for effective collaboration is really, really important. What about cross-cultural leadership? As we were sharing with the class this weekend, as organizations globalize, it's not one culture fits all, but there's a core set of values, there's a core set of behaviors that is an enabler that you want to be able to unlock. And of course, the need for new frameworks. We know that the world is changing so fast. We're in a very contemporary world with very contemporary challenges. And so traditional leadership models often fall short, highlighting the need for cultural agility paired with strategic execution. We just highlight a model of research here, how research is managed, how it's undertaken, how people are supported. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that investing in your culture takes conscious effort. It takes conscious engagement. Thanks, Pierre. So some of the research foundation that we find exceptionally valuable as we navigate this post-pandemic world together was Shine's culture framework. Shine's model defines culture through artifacts, espoused values, and underlying assumptions, highlighting its complexity. Or indeed the competing values framework. And all we're really trying to do is give you some academic background to this. Cameron and Quinn link cultural adaptability to organizational effectiveness through their competing values framework. Or Cotter who many MBA students will embrace time and time again, emphasizes that lasting culture change requires committed leadership over 5 to 7 years. What are we illustrating here? It starts with a conscious decision, and it starts with a continual focus on building good organizational culture, but it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's really, really important. Intent and strategic intent can happen overnight, but demonstrable progress is something that you monitor over time. And of course, the benefits of culture development, organizations with intentional culture as sort of at the heart of their development, see higher engagement, lower turnover, and increased profitability. And we know that to recruit new staff, new employees on an ongoing basis, the onboarding and bringing up to speed, as it were, is a very expensive exercise. Aren't you better off retaining the workforce you have and developing skills in that way? So the model I referred to a little earlier was really around post-pandemic sustainability. We named the model. We called it the modus quantum model framework. And this integrates mission, leadership, collaboration, governance, and shared economy for resilience. What we try to illustrate there is if purpose is clear and culture is healthy and all of the other elements that you need for a good business are in balance, you have something that flourishes and thrives and is sustainable. But at its heart is cultural transformation and the importance thereof. It helps organizations adapt to uncertainty whilst maintaining purpose and cohesion. And if you think what it is, I mean, Pierre, we were lecturing this weekend, and one of the things we said to our students was you want to future-proof an organization, and you future-proof through a good, sustainable strategy, something that is refreshed on an ongoing basis, but it is underpinned by healthy organizational culture. Can't stress that enough. Thank you. So who drives culture? Now, we're all leaders on this call today. There's 81 of us on this call. We're all leaders. I want you to reflect very deeply on your role as a leader. What role do you play in driving healthy organizational culture? We often hear, well, actually, my manager doesn't display good culture, so I've just given in. Well, actually, no, that's not the answer. The answer is you can drive microcultures within the organization that you're in. What do I mean by microculture? A culture that thrives, that recognizes people, that makes them feel purposeful and engaged. Yes, it is helpful if the macro culture is an enabling culture and reflects what you're trying to do. But I want you to reflect on your role as a leader. Now, typically, boards of trustees, boards of directors, ultimately are accountable for organizational culture and organization strategy, derived by the executive, but they are mutually accountable. And so you want to drive healthy culture all the way through an organization. And there's very much that element of the top-down culture influence. And so organizational culture does start with senior leaders who shape norms and values through their actions. But it doesn't mean that you don't take accountability for how you lead. Transformational leadership traits. Transformational leaders inspire and they motivate and they encourage intellectual growth and provide individualized support. We all know this. We've worked for some good managers and maybe not such good managers. We remember the good ones. We remember the good leaders, the ones who made us feel engaged. We also remember the not so good leaders, the ones who made us feel disengaged or less purposeful. Think about the kind of leader you are. Think about the kind of behaviors you model. Leaders must embody the values and behaviors they want to see in order to drive real cultural change. And when you are designing your strategy as an organization and you are trying to future-proof your organization, one of the things you really want to do is you want to focus on your culture as an organization. Thanks, Pierre. The critical middle. This is what I was referring to earlier. Okay. In an ideal world, your board of trustees, your board of directors, your executive set a cultural direction of travel, set a strategic direction of travel. How that then translates is what we refer to as the critical middle. And I think if we left with anything from this today, Jean, is that we are culture translators as leaders. That's part of our role. okay? And so middle managers, senior managers in this instance as well, translate strategic goals into operational culture, embedding values into daily work practices. Remember what we started with. If you want to unlock that discretionary energy, that where folk go over and above and beyond because they are so engaged, think about the role you play in unlocking that. The critical middle faces the challenges. They face challenges like conflicting priorities and resistance whilst trying to foster cultural change. As a responsible leader, I would say to you, that responsibility resides with you and it resides with me. We set the trend, okay? Empowering strategies, empowering middle managers with skills, tools, and clear expectations enables effective cultural transformation. So when you are setting the organizational strategy, when you are intentionally investing in culture, change management and cultural practices are embedded in the heart of what you do. So individual agency. I've already emphasized this. Personal leadership. What is the role you play as a leader? Think of your own self-awareness, your authenticity, your growth mindset, which empowers to lead and align with organizational values. We do a very interesting piece of work, and it's using a tool by Barrett, which effectively talks around what are your personal values, what are the organization's values. And when your personal values and the organizational values align, that's when you get what we call entropy, levels of entropy. There's healthy entropy and there's unhealthy entropy. Healthy entropy is when the organization's aligned. There's a little bit of creative tension and chaos, but not unhelpful. When that entropy is higher, the organizational chaos gets to the point where it is counterproductive. Think about your role as a leader in creating healthy entropy. So I've given you two core concepts so far: discretionary energy and healthy entropy. Think about the role you play in that. Culture co-creation. Culture is shaped daily through employee actions and interactions, emphasizing shared ownership. This is not somebody else's problem. This is a shared endeavor, a shared co-creation. And bottom-up innovation, so encouraging innovation from all levels. And of course, we know that this will then foster dynamic environments where values are actively led. In other words, create an environment that's enabling. Not all solutions come from the top. Very often, those solutions can be derived from within the organization, but have a culture that is open to learn from all levels of the organization. And of course, peer accountability. You want to be able to influence each other, hold each other to account, and promote authentic adherence to shared cultural values. Thanks, Pierre. We also talk about an integrated responsibility. So there's a real systems approach to culture. Culture transformation requires a holistic systems approach involving multiple organizational stakeholders working together. But it does start, go back to our model right in the beginning, with purpose and mission right at the center. When that is clear, you radiate from there, okay? And it becomes an integrated system of accountability. We've spoken about the roles of executives. Executives are paid to provide vision, but that vision isn't derived in smoky rooms, smoky dark rooms, okay? It's something that is co-created with the whole organization. And of course, you invest in your HR and your infrastructure design. So your people and culture, really fundamental here at the heart of driving good culture. And of course, it is about alignment. You want to drive consistency, drive alignment across the organization. You don't want, to be fair, a world where the macro culture, the organizational culture, and the microcultures are so vastly different. You actually want something that is cohesive and feels aligned. So how it's achieved? There is an ideation process framework which we've designed, and this framework uses 5 phases to guide cultural transformation, from diagnosis to refinement for sustainable change. I had already alluded to the fact that you look at your values as an organization, look at personal values, and you try and create a lower entropy, but healthy entropy. We have designed a model around methodological foundations and each phase incorporates the model which we've described. These are just tools we're sharing with you today. Enneagram, IEQ9, design thinking for effective outcomes. These are simply approaches to how you would go about designing and ideating, to use some modern parlance, the ideal culture. And of course, continuous improvement. This is not a once-off, flash-in-the-pan wonder. Okay, you design with intent and you see it through continuous iterations. And of course, collaborative design. So you want to co-create this with all stakeholders. You want to engage your board of trustees. You want to engage your customers. Ever thought of asking your customers how they perceive your culture? What about brand? I mean, Pierre, you might want to reflect on that. But if your brand isn't coherent with your culture, you feel like an organization that isn't aligned. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Thanks, Pierre. The next slide is really just demonstrating phases of transformation. Again, really happy to share this with you. But we spoke around where you diagnose, you ideate your ideal culture, you implement, you do continuous improvement, and you refine. Okay, it's something that is intentional and is continually monitored. So this is just an example of models. And of course, you want to be able to analyze, you want to be able to learn from the data. What gets measured gets managed. Culture is something you can measure. It's absolutely something you can measure. And you can measure it through key performance indicators, through outcomes, through commercial results, through staff engagement. There are so many different mechanisms available to you to derive healthy culture. Thank you. So we have collaborated with BSN and are developing a culture, an MBA with a culture minor, which you will hear more about soon. But effectively what this is, it's human-centered coaching, it's design thinking approach, it's the diagnostics all the way through to measurement, it's the role of myself as a leader, you as a leader, how you create engagement at the top levels of an organization, and how you co-create throughout the whole organization. So this is just an example of some of the work we're doing with BSN, and you will hear more about this soon. So watch this space. Thanks, Pierre. I think we are at the end of this presentation. So key takeaways: culture is a competitive advantage. In particular, a post-pandemic approach. Which organizations have survived and why? And what were the key culture differentiators? This is something you want to reflect on. Don't forget your role as a leader. And what you're wanting to do is you want to drive sustained cultural transformation. And this is absolutely a call to action to you and I to be good culture leaders. Thank you very much. Pierre, over to you.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Sean, and welcome everyone. So a lot to reflect on there. Thankfully, I was taking notes, although I should really know this like the back of my hand. I think it's interesting coming off the back of two sessions that we facilitated, George, over the weekend, where we were talking about strategy specifically, but how we found it very difficult to have that strategy conversation in a way that was divorced from culture. So, you go back to what you were saying, supposedly Peter Drucker, and we have a back and forth about this, but, strategy, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think it makes perfect sense that we kept dipping into that culture conversation, and even though we were having a strategy session. And I guess what I wanted to pick up on at the outset is so much of that strategy development, and we spoke so much about how many strategic initiatives fail. And a lot of it is because it fails on the execution. And obviously the execution happens with people. And that's a whole change management process. So you need to bring people along for the journey. And one of the things that I touched on in those sessions was the importance of having a more consultative process around strategy development, rather than having this ivory tower process. And I think the same thing happens with culture. And you were talking about co-creation, for example, right towards the end of the presentation. And I think if you go back to the sort of strategic analysis or development process that we've defined, it all starts with vision and mission, and values. And that ultimately is what underpins culture. And it's from that you can actually use that as a point of alignment to develop your strategy. And that co-creation element is immensely valuable if you have not just a typical top-down approach, but you take this bottom-up approach as well, and then you socialize that laterally throughout the business. So I think that co-creation piece is incredibly important, because it just means that you have a lot more engagement in the process. People are more invested. They have a sense of ownership, not just of the culture, but any strategy that comes out of that. And I think there are tons of examples, and you also spoke about bottom-up innovation. So this is where that piece also comes in, where so much value is derived from involving all people in the business in that culture development, but also encouraging risk-free sharing of ideas. Let me go back to the beginning of my notes. That of course also assumes that there's that element of psychological safety. And you spoke about how we remember the bad managers that we engaged with through our careers, and I can certainly think of a few that I would never wish to encounter again. I'm pretty sure I still have PTSD from them. But if you can imagine someone in that position, in a very senior position at a corporate level, how toxic that can be. It's certainly not a great driver for people taking risks. And taking risks is obviously critically important or required if you're wanting to drive innovation in the business. So that gets stalled immediately. You spoke about discretionary energy, or employee engagement, going beyond, going the extra mile. One of the conversations we had on the weekend in one of the sessions was around that very concept, employee engagement, and I suppose the tussle between toxic leaders and people in the business having the space to experiment and help to drive strategy themselves. So that I thought was a very, very important point that you made right at the beginning. That also, to some extent, feeds into hybrid work and the resistance that we're still seeing around hybrid or remote work. I don't think that genie is ever going back into the bottle, and yet there are still so many corporate teams or leadership teams that seem to continue wanting to get people back into the office physically. There are a lot of arguments, and I think Jamie Dimon, for one, at JP Morgan, continues to bang on about how it's so important to have people in the office because that's where they learn by observation, etc. And I get that. I've worked with many remote teams, and I think one of the things that comes out of that for me is it's got to be intentional. It's not just an operational decision. I think it's got to be about creating the space where you build those relationships. So to use an example, I worked with a company based in Gothenburg in Sweden. I was based here in the UK, managing their sales team. But the thing that made the most enormous difference despite the fact that we didn't actually see each other all that often, is that every few months we would physically gather in Gothenburg and we would have a sales engagement, or we would have a company-wide town hall. And it just meant that those sort of relationships, you could build those relationships in person, so that when you're working remotely, you didn't feel this fragmentation. So it was very, very intentional. And it was part of it was very much an organizational culture initiative. So I think that's something that jumped out for me. We spoke about AI, for example. I read an interesting piece the other day about how 60 to 70% of people in middle management admit to using AI, but are reluctant to admit it to their managers. And then on the other hand, there was also a very interesting McKinsey piece that came out recently about how AI is not delivering the sort of outcomes and productivity gains that executives anticipate. So there's this very interesting conflict between how it's being used and how it's been socialized. That I think is going to be it's going to have a massive impact on organizational culture going forward. And I think that's something that leadership is going to have to grapple with. And it would be helpful to have a two-way conversation around that, especially given people's nervousness about losing their jobs, for example. I don't know, Jean, if I should be reading things that are in the chat here and perhaps trying to respond to them.
Yeah, Pierre, what we can do, I see there is one question so far. Once you've wrapped up, I think we can deal with a question, and then we will aim to finish at about 10 past 8. Sorry, 8 minutes past 10, the other way around.
Okay, so one last point then, so that we can actually take questions. But I think the point that George made around the role of middle managers is extremely important. I know that, and I imagine we've all worked in situations where we would love our senior management or executive management to be very different, but one can certainly in your own team create your own team culture. And I think if that is it's very easy to abdicate responsibility, right, as managers at whatever level you are, and say, oh, but that's just how it is around here. That's just the culture, and yes, as you said, George, people say, well, I've just given up now. But I think that's not a helpful approach. You abdicate agency as a manager, and you don't help to buffer your team from that toxic environment. So certainly within your team, I think it's very, very reasonable and achievable to build an enabling, psychologically safe place to work. It might not cascade up, but I think you would see measurable improvements in engagement within your own team and improved results. And that can only work to everyone's benefit. And if everyone at that sort of middle level of the business adopted a similar approach, there might not be complete congruency or alignment across all of those teams, but you begin to build a critical mass. And I think that's critically important. We all have agency to be able to do that. And I think that's probably a good place to park it.
Perfect. Pierre, thank you. And Dr. Woods, also thank you very much. Your closing comment, Pierre, actually was a good cue for the question that is in the chat. So I'm going to read it to you verbatim. And Dr. Woods, if either you or Pierre would like to field this question. The question reads, can organizational culture be enforced on employees, or is the best way to implement it through a soft approach? Because some employees are storm-head to observe those organizational patterns.
Let me give a view, and Pierre, feel free to come in. There is something about driving authentic culture within an organization. And so a top-down enforced culture, I don't think lands well at all. But a top-down where leaders exhibit the kind of culture they want, good or bad, has every chance of success.
Okay.
Because it is very much emulated from the top. If I see my leaders behave in a particular way, I think it's acceptable. So driving authentically good and healthy culture is very much something that is led by leaders. But notwithstanding what Pierre described earlier, and I started to describe as macro and micro cultures, there is nothing stopping you as a leader driving a micro culture within your own organization that you lead. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think my response to that would be twofold. One, I don't think that any change initiative, whether we're talking here about a cultural transformation or a new strategic initiative in the business, ever works when it is enforced or autocratically mandated. And let's face it, there are those CEOs who think that it is in their gift to do that, or in their right. It's just not ever really going to work very well. It's really, really difficult to push people to do things that require them to change what they're accustomed to doing. They've got to know very clearly what's in it for them. And that's where the consultation piece comes in. If people are invested in a change and they can understand why the change is necessary, even if they don't necessarily like all of the outcomes, I think you're more likely to get people to buy into that. That's certainly been my experience. And the outcome of that, though, is that, as George said, you can have the intent. That's easy.
Yeah.
Getting the execution is the challenge, and that's why it takes longer than people would like. But you've got to front load it with the right approach, and then the rest is a lot easier.
Great. Well, Pierre, Dr. Woods, thank you very much for this morning's insightful session. And thank you also to everyone that joined us this morning. If you would like to know more, anyone on the line, about BSN's Impact Center for Great Leadership, or if you're interested in a program to further grow the talent of your team or yourself, just put it in the chat and we will contact you. Next week's topic is about the burgeoning leadership model from traditional leadership to digital leadership, which will be hosted by Grace Opore, and she will be joined by Chidima Nsofo for reflections. And we certainly look forward to welcoming you there. But just before we close today's session, I'm going to ask Paul to share some exciting news about an upcoming Good Morning BSN event. Paul, if you can tell us more, please.
All right, thank you, Jane. Thank you, Dr. Robert. I'm sorry, Dr. Woods. It's fair. Maybe Pierre is working on his PhD. I don't know. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone, once again. So we are approaching our 100th edition of Good Morning BSN, and that will be on the 20th of January, 2026. And we decided to make it a hybrid event that we have physical attendees and also online attendees. All right. So that will be possible for only those of us who are in Lagos anyway. And if you want to fly in from the UK, from South Africa to join us, you're welcome. All right. So I'll be dropping a link in the chat room for those of us who are in Lagos or who are in Nigeria and want to join us at the BSN office at Ikeja, GRA Ikeja. Please kindly fill the form, right, so that we can make adequate preparation for you. All right. So it's happening on the 20th of January 2026, and we're looking forward for it to be a wonderful event. There's going to be a panel discussion. We also have gifts that will be given out to those who will be present. So we look forward to having everyone join us. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Over to you.
Thank you. So that sounds exciting for those that can join in person in Lagos for the 100th edition of Good Morning BSN on the 20th of January, which sounds like it'll be an exciting event. And for those that unfortunately can't travel there for the morning, we will still be able to join online. Is that correct, Paul?
Yes, they'll be able to join online.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for this morning's session and joining us. We look forward to seeing you at next week's session. And that brings us to an end for today. Thank you very much.